Hi and welcome to Peschu's Corner. Today I want to talk about some of the applications of indirect taxation and price elasticity of demand and price elasticity of supply. I want to keep this video short, but one thing that you should be aware is that to keep it short, I will not go into very big detail explaining about price elasticity of demand and indirect taxation. I would be expecting that you already know these topics. But in case that you do not, please feel free to check out some of my other videos where I go into details about either indirect taxation or the concepts of price elasticity of supply and price elasticity of demand. Okay, well, let's get started. First, I would like to have a look at how price elasticity of demand has an impact on the consumers and on the producers when we place a tax. To do this, we are going to have two diagrams next to each other. One will be illustrating a demand curve with inelastic price elasticity of demand, and the other one will be with the demand curve that has elastic price elasticity of demand. Right, let's have somewhat similar supply curves in order to eliminate the variation or in the price elasticity of supply. And over here I'm gonna have inelastic price elasticity of demand, so PED would be less than 1, and over here I'll be having elastic price elasticity of demand, so PED would be greater than 1. Let's mark the equilibrium points in each situation. So this would be QE, this would be PE, I'm going to use a specific tax, but if you do the same exercise and you use an ad valorem tax, the outcome will still be identical to our findings. So let's add, okay, this would be my S2 after tax, and a similar S2 after the tax. And we can see that in this situation my tax T would be hopefully somewhat similar in both cases. Now the effect of this tax on the inelastic demand curve would be as follows. So this would be QE2, PE2, and over here we're gonna have QE2, PE2. So the first obvious difference that we should notice is that in the case of elastic price elasticity of demand, the price increased very little, while in the case of inelastic price elasticity of demand, the increase in the price was quite substantial, almost equal to the tax itself. Now, the reason why this happens is because when we have elastic price elasticity of demand, usually consumers are able to switch to other products. So when we tax this good, they will, most of the consumers will cease consuming this product, and they will just move to some of the available substitutes on the market. This explains the sharp decline in quantity demanded and the relatively small increase in the price. On the other hand, goods with inelastic demand tend to be either, how to say, addictive. On the other hand, goods with inelastic demand tend to either have addictive nature, which means that people are unable to stop consuming them because, well, they need to consume them. Examples of this can be alcohol, tobacco products, or alternatively, they are not available substitutes. For example, petrol that we use to run our cars. Once if our car is running on regular petrol, it would be quite expensive to actually modify the engine so that it can run with another fuel, which explains why we continue buying petrol despite the fact that it's heavily taxed. So the result of that is we have a relatively small decline in quantity demanded and a relatively large increase in the price. Now, let's see what happens to the level of income that the producers will be receiving after the tax is being deducted. So, in the case with elastic demand, the price increased from PE to PE2, and once we deduct the tax, the producers are gonna get PPR, price for the producer. And we can see that in the case of the elastic demand, because of the relatively large decline in quantity demanded, the price for the consumers increased relatively little, but the price for the producers fell quite substantially. On the other hand, when we have inelastic demand, this would be the price for the producers after tax, and we can tell that because of the relatively small decline in quantity demanded, the price for the consumers increased substantially. It went from PE to PE2, and the price for the producers declined, but by a lot smaller value, so from PE to PR2. We can also show the relative consumer and producer incidence. So let's do that. The green area will illustrate our consumer incidence. So this is the consumer incidence, and we can tell that when the price elasticity of demand is elastic, the consumer incidence is relatively small, and when the price elasticity of demand is inelastic, the consumer incidence is relatively high. Again, that makes sense because of the inelastic nature of these goods, or because the lack of available substitutes. We can also show the producer incidence. It will be this area. And so this is my producer incidence. And we can tell that the producer incidence is relatively smaller when we have inelastic demand, and relatively large when we have elastic demand. So if you want to apply this to real world situations, normally it's very easy to identify the groups which complain about taxes. For example, if we put taxes on petrol, what you are likely to observe is that consumers of petrol will be the ones complaining. Drivers, transportation companies, taxi drivers, that kind of people, simply because they're the ones who consume this product. It's relatively inelastic, and as a result, they will be paying the majority of the tax. On the other hand, I remember reading an article when the government was considering increasing a tax on gambling. And in that case, it was the casinos who were complaining about this tax, simply because gambling, because of its expensive nature, usually tends to be to have more elastic demand. It is true that for some individuals it can be highly addictive, but in the majority of the case, gambling would have elastic demand, and thus the people, the group of the society that was going to be affected more heavily by this tax were the actual producers or the casinos. And if you're doing an economics commentary, for example, for your IB economics course, this can be a very good topic to actually go analyze, have diagrams, and show some evaluation of the situation. Okay, next we are going to have a very similar analysis, but this time we are going to look at what happens when we have elastic supply and what happens when we have inelastic supply. Okay, so just like before, I'm going to draw two diagrams next to each other. Quantity, price and price. In this case, the price elasticity of supply would be greater than 1, so this is elastic. In this case, the price elasticity of supply will be less than 1, so this will be inelastic. Let's have a similar demand curve. Something like this. And okay, so price elasticity of supply is inelastic over here, so this would be my supply. And price elasticity of supply will be elastic over here, so here is my supply. This would be QE, this would be PE, QE, PE. And again, we are going to add a tax which is identical in both cases. So this is my tax, this is my tax, and the new supply curves will be S2, S2, yeah, this one did not come out quite right. That's better. And again, we do the same process as before. If this is E0, this would be E1, QE1, PE1, E0, E1. And finally, we want to mark the prices that the producers will receive. In this case, this would be PPR. And in this case, it will be PPR. Let's shade the consumer and producer incidences from the tax. The consumer incidence is the one at the top. This is my consumer incidence, and this is what the producers are paying. So by looking at these two diagrams, it should become evident that the consumers are worse off when the price elasticity of supply is more elastic. And the producers are worse off when the price elasticity of supply is less elastic. That again should not come as a surprise, simply because when the price elasticity of supply is elastic, that means the producers will be more able to adjust their production process and change the level of supply according to the new prices, so thus they will be less affected. When the price elasticity of supply is inelastic, the firms producing would not necessarily be able to adjust their supply processes and modify their machines or input sources, and as a result they will end up paying the majority of the tax. Alright guys, well, my suggestion would be not to memorize who is affected how in each of the 4 situations that we observed in this lesson. For me, the easiest thing would be just to do a quick drawing, a sketch that shows, let's say, inelastic and elastic demand, or one that shows inelastic and elastic supply, and just compare the two. This way, I would never have to worry about memorizing who is worse off in which situation, well, nobody is really better off. The government is better off simply because the government will be the one collecting this tax. Both the consumers and the producers will be affected negatively from the tax, but definitely one of the two parties will suffer more, let's put it this way. But again, you do not need to memorize them. All you have to do is just make a quick sketch, analyze, or just compare how the producers and the consumers are affected, and try to think why this is happening. Again, these kind of topics, they are a very good source for economic portfolios and commentary. So if you have to write a commentary on microeconomics, you can find an article that discusses effects of taxes, either adding or removing the taxes, and if you analyze what the price elasticity of demand or the price elasticity of supply would be, you would be able to actually reach a conclusion which party would be affected the worst or the best from the given situation. Alright, I hope you like this lesson. If you did, please hit the like button. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments area. I'll try to answer them. And if you want, please subscribe to the channel. I hope to see you again. Take care.